Welcome in to Stop the Takes, football podcast focused on getting back to just talking ball. I'm Dakota, that's Austin, and today we are continuing our NFL draft reviews division by division. We are on to the NFC South today. So we've wrapped up the Norths, the Easts, and the AFC South, and now going to the NFC South. So check out those others if you have it. We're also releasing some of the individual team clips from those. So if you're interested in just a specific team, keep an eye out for those. But without further ado, we're going to dive into this, starting off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who kind of made a surprising pick, I would say, at pick 19, taking Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. What were your thoughts on that, Austin?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised because you could argue with them re-signing Chris Godwin in the offseason, it wasn't the biggest team need. But I loved the pick, dude. I thought it was an extremely safe pick. I wouldn't say it was necessarily the best player on the board at the time. I probably would have ranked Golden ahead of Emeka Egbuka if I had to rank receivers this year. But Emeka Egbuka is one of the safest picks in the draft, dude. He's just going to be a solid, dependable number 2 wide receiver. I think he does fit into the offense despite them re-signing Chris Godwin. Plus, Chris Godwin hasn't been the most reliable as far as staying healthy is concerned. So that's also part of that. But I honestly believe you can get all 3 of the receivers on the field at the same time. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Emeka Egbuka on the field at the same time with Baker Mayfield. We were just talking about before the show, Baker has become one of the better QBs in the league. Maybe not one of those top 8 elite QBs, but he's right there on the edge of that, I would say. So all of a sudden, dude, this offense is looking pretty good going into 2025.
Yeah, I'd say I like the position. I like attacking wide receiver. You can never have too many. I think you and I both would have had Luther Burden ahead of him in terms of just because then it makes me also think if you added Burden to this offense,
It's true.
that feels pretty special as well. But to your point, I would say Ibuka is probably the most consistent receiver of the class. He actually set the career reception record at Ohio State, which is pretty impressive considering how many guys have come out of there. But yeah, to your point, he does kind of fit what Chris Godwin does. And, he has been, you can't rely on him to be on the field as much lately. Mike Evans is also getting up there in age. I mean, he's still continuing his 1,000-yard streak. Had to fight for it at the end of this past season. But you can never have too much depth. And with an older receiver like Evans, and then also with Godwin's injury history, I think it makes sense to get a guy with that skill set that you can rely on. And pairing him with, McMillan from last year, which I was a big fan of that pick. They still have Jalen McMillan. And, they signed Sterling Shepard. They still have Trey Palmer as well. So start to have a pretty deep
loaded wide receiver class.
Yeah, around Baker Mayfield.
Yeah. I agree, dude. That's a loaded wide receiver core, dude. And I think Emeka Egbuka will probably be a starter in that, even if Chris Godwin is healthy. Yeah. So, again, it's not the flashiest first round pick. It is a receiver, but Emeka Egbuka is not the flashiest receiver. But I do agree with you. Luther Burden would have been pretty intriguing in this offense, or even Matthew Golden, like I mentioned. So, but I think they overall, with a team that is close, right? I mean, this is a team that's been competing in the NFC year in, year out now. They're still a bit away from the Eagles, I would say. But a team that's close, getting a safe guy like Emeka Egbuka who will be productive, I think that made sense.
Yeah, and to that point, what some people have kind of equated their draft to was hitting it down the fairway. You just taking more of the safe picks, guys that you just know are good football players. A little bit of injury history with the next guy we'll talk about. So they then double up at corner with 2 guys I know we're both big fans of. Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame and Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. For those that don't know, Benjamin Morrison had a pretty bad hip injury that put him out for most of this past season, and is really the reason he didn't go in the first round. I mean, in terms of tape-wise, the guy was probably up there with like Will Johnson if he was healthy too, but in terms of just the best corner in this class, incredibly consistent. He's one of those guys where like he just rarely gets beat. And obviously the health concerns are a big part of that now. But getting a guy like him in the second round and to then also pair with Jacob Parrish in the third is pretty solid.
Yeah, I love taking the chance on Benjamin Morris, man. Like you said, he is absolutely a first round talent if he didn't have that hip issue coming out of Notre Dame. Now listen, the hip issue is a legitimate reason for him to fall to the second
Yeah.
round. Hips are pretty important for cornerbacks, so that's definitely something we're gonna have to keep an eye out on in the NFL. But I still love taking that kind of risk because yes, it could backfire, but you could also get a first round talent in the back end of the second round. So I love the Benjamin Morrison pick, and then Jacob Parrish is a like massive athlete, great like really good speed. So he's interested too for depth. I love how they doubled up at corner in the second and third round. They clearly saw that as a
Yep.
big need and that they needed attack in the offseason. And again, I've said this to you a lot, Dakota, but for some of our listeners who haven't listened, I just love that strategy, dude. I love doubling up at a position like cornerback because it increases your hit rate. Now you are much more likely to find either one of those two guys end up being a starter. So I like doing that as a strategy.
Completely agree. And after losing Murphy Bunting and they still have Jamel Dean, they kind of hit on those corners a while back that were in later rounds. But now they had same things actually true with Zion McCollum, who's outplayed being a fifth round pick. But they definitely needed depth and they needed more guys in that room. And two guys, kind of to your point, that have different skill sets where, Benjamin Morrison's really great in man coverage. He's going to be a guy that plays outside, where Jacob Parrish's athleticism and the way he plays, he could play anywhere. So you could put him in the slot, or he can play outside wherever you need him. So I love doubling up at corner there. And then they continue that trend and they double up at edge. So they take David Walker out of Central Arkansas and then Elijah Roberts out of SMU. David Walker's a really interesting one because he kind of dominated at that, that level with Central Arkansas. So not at like the D1 top of FBS level. But he had the high athleticism as well. He's a pretty athletic guy. So the questions there are just around, he didn't do it against high level competition. And I think he didn't look the best when at the Senior Bowl, but a guy that clearly knows how to produce regardless. And then with Elijah Roberts, a guy who also tested pretty well, not as productive. He's a late round pick for a reason. But another guy to get in there who was an honorable mention All ACC this past season.
Yeah, I mean, I'll again like doubling up at edge, and David Walker is intriguing. Like you said, it's really just the competition question marks, and I think Elijah Roberts could turn into something as well. And you can never have too many edge rushers, man. You really can't, and they've really been attacking that the last few years. Now, are you going to find an elite guy, a game changer in the fourth and fifth round? Probably not. But as we've seen with the Eagles, man, this whole offseason, people will keep talking about defensive line depth. So it makes total sense for them to go back at back edge rushers.
And honestly, it makes me wonder if Tampa Bay is paying attention to PFF a bit. Because if you look at all these guys they drafted, they were all pretty high graded players, which is interesting because all these teams work with PFF, obviously, but David Walker did well from pass rush perspective, but also had a 92.6 run defense grade this past season, which is insane. And then Elijah Roberts has posted a 90 plus pass rush grade the past 2 seasons. So they clearly, those are the things that project. PFF, people can say what they will about them, but specifically edge rushers, their PFF, the grading for them has been pretty good indicator on whether or not they'll translate to the NFL. And then they round things out with Tez Johnson, a guy I think people are surprised fell mainly due to the lack of athleticism at his size. He's an incredibly interesting prospect at 5'10", 154, ran a 4.51, which I think put him in a percentile of like one of the slowest for a sub like 170 weight athlete or whatever. But a productive guy at Oregon, though.
Yeah, he was extremely productive, dude. It was all about the workout. The workout absolutely killed him and his stock. But again, adding to this absolutely loaded, this is honestly looking at it, dude, and talking through it. This might be the deepest wide receiver core in the NFL. It's going to be hard to get all these guys the ball because, like you said, I actually really liked how Jalen McMillan looked in his rookie season. You add Sterling Shepard, it's like I don't see how Sterling Shepard's going to play. Like somebody's got to go. And I feel like Tez Johnson could be productive for this team, even though he was a 7th round pick. Because like you said, he was an extremely productive college player. So, but the lack of athleticism will definitely hurt in the NFL. We'll just have to see on that. But in the 7th round, taking an extremely productive player with like low athleticism, that to me makes a lot of sense, man. It's just like that's how you should use your 7th round picks. Instead of drafting special teams players, draft a receiver that with his high production has high upside, even though he is not a great athlete. So I loved that making that pick, and I mean, this receiving core is pretty scary, dude, and very deep.
And even though he's not that athletic, like watching his tape, he still just gets open.
Yep.
Like he's a very good route runner, so he does provide a completely different body type and skill set to the receivers they have as well, which is why, like to your point, he could find his way onto the field as a 7th round draft pick. And I think I don't want to speak incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure it was against Zaire Thomas, corner out of Florida State at the Senior Bowl when they did one-on-ones that he absolutely cooked and may have like directly been responsible for him dropping in the draft. So he may not have elite athleticism, but he still manages to get open against good corners. So it would be really interesting to see him alongside, new teammate Emeka Egbuka and Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Jalen McMillan at incredibly deep wide receiver room. So Bucks go double wide receiver, double corner, double edge, attacking all of the most valuable positions outside of quarterback.
I love it. I just love that process, dude. They have their guy. They have their franchise guy. So load up at the other most valuable positions. Absolutely love that for the Bucks. I thought they had a really solid draft.
And they also had a handful of interesting few DFAs as well. We try to touch on those. They had some of the most interesting. So Connor Bazelak, quarterback from Bowling Green, who was at Missouri originally and then transferred. He was the starter at Missouri for a minute, so they get him. They also invited Texas State quarterback Jordan McLeod to minicamp, who kind of broke out this past season there. And then an interesting one, Garrett Green, the quarterback from West Virginia. They apparently are signing him to try him out at receiver.
Yeah,
which is fascinating. He is very athletic. So with this receiver room, though, I don't know if he's going to find a way onto that roster.
Yeah. It's going to be tough.
Yeah. They also get Shiloh Sanders. So the other Sanders that was in this draft. And then the most interesting one, Desmond Watson. 460 pounds of man from Florida. That gives them now the smallest person in the NFL and the largest.
Yep, it sure does, dude. And someone had a brilliant idea I heard the other day to have Vita Vea lead block for Desmond Watson on an end zone carry. That'd be literally the most terrifying backfield ever assembled in NFL history. Desmond Watson's interesting because for someone who is literally the heaviest player to ever play football at like any like legitimate level, Desmond Watson moved pretty good. Like he was actually not an awful player. Now I have heard he's already lost like 30 pounds, and dude, I mean,
yeah, he probably should.
He's dude, yeah, exactly. Just for his health, he should lose 30 pounds. But I mean, honestly, he could lose about 50 to 80 more pounds. So it's going to be interesting to see if he actually makes a team or what his NFL career will look like. But it is fascinating that they brought in literally the largest player in NFL history and the smallest player in NFL history in one offseason.
And he is literally 3 times at the listed weight. He was 3 times the size of Tez Johnson, which is fascinating. And if he is around that weight at their current weights, him and Vita Vea next to each other on the D line would be over 800 pounds of defensive line to go through.
Oh, that's
say stop
wild.
The tush push.
Yeah, I mean, people did call him the tush push stopper, which I honestly don't hate that as a roster spot, dude. Because what did we just talk about? The Bucks are one of the best teams in the NFC. Yeah. One of the teams they have to get through is the Philadelphia Eagles. So there you go.
Love it. With that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the Bucks?
Oh, that is a good question. I will have to say, man, I love the value of Tez Johnson in the 7th round. I just think there's not many 7th round picks that I look at and like, oh, this could actually be a impactful 7th round pick. But I think Tez Johnson is one of the few. So I'll say Tez Johnson in the 7th.
Like it. I'm going to go Benjamin Morrison in the 2nd then. Hip issue is there, right? You've got to be worried about his health. Will he be able to be what he was in 2023 in the beginning of 2024? But I love taking a gamble on that in the second round because if he hits, he's going to hit. Like he will be a staple cornerback for this team for a while. So love the value of him in the second. We do look at Renee Bugner, guy on Twitter, does excuse me, a composite grading system. So he takes about 20 to 25 different riders, their grades for each team's draft, and does essentially a composite to give it like a GPA. So we've been looking at those for each team as we've gone through these. Where did the Bucs come in at?
They are tied with a division rival. I will not give that away, but they are tied with a division rival at 11th. So kind of like we were saying, man, with a team in the Bucs that didn't draft a lot, they hit on their draft picks as far as, what people feel about the players they got. So I think they had a really, really good draft for what they had coming into the draft.
Yeah, I think so. With like a minimal, fewer picks, but I mean, again, I think this is indicative as what we've reiterated over and over again of how well everybody drafted. Because I feel like this type of draft 2 years ago would have probably been a top 5 one, to be honest. But
I agreed.
Perfect. So that is the Bucs 2025 class, which moves us on to the Atlanta Falcons, who they made a splash in the first round.
They did.
So they get gifted Jalen Walker. I feel like they did not expect him to be on the board then. And with the guy they were debating him with at pick 15, they decided to trade back into the first round at pick 26, moving up with the Rams to take Tennessee's edge rusher, James Pierce Jr. So they double up at edge in the first round, giving up a future first as well to go get James Pierce Jr.
So as we've been kind of debating through the whole offseason, listen, we don't love this process as far as trading up for a non-quarterback. Just generally speaking, that's poor process because you're usually not going to be able to get the value out of that player for what you give up. And they gave up a lot. They gave up a first-round pick next year. So they basically said James Pierce Jr. is worth their second-round pick from the 2025 draft and their first-round pick next year to trade up to get him. But I will say, and I might be a little biased. We are Tennessee fans, so we know a lot about Jalen Walker and James Pierce. Pairing both these guys on the defensive line together in Raheem Morris's scheme is fascinating, dude. That is a fascinating look because what was their biggest need everyone, literally go look at any mock draft, mocked them an edge rusher. They mocked them an edge rusher. And like you said, Dakota, I don't think they expected Jalen Walker to be on the board.
No.
So they were targeting James Pierce. That's who they were looking at drafting at 15. They end up getting Jalen Walker. Well, how do you fix your biggest need? Everyone agreed that this was the Falcons' biggest need. You double up with two guys who are talent-wise could be top 15 players in this draft, maybe even top 10 players in this draft if James Pierce didn't have the off-the-field questions. So, dude, that's intriguing, man, because in one offseason, in one draft, and one night of the draft, you could have turned the biggest weakness of your team into one of the bigger strengths of your team.
Yeah, and not a big fan of moving up for non-quarterbacks, but it is a fascinating combination. A team that has been consistently mocked to draft edge rushers for like the past 4 years, and they just kept punting on it. They did load up last year in late round picks on the defensive line, but not really investing in the position. And it definitely sounds like they were absolutely baffled that Jalen Walker was on the board at 15. And funnily enough, in our mock draft that we did, it was the same thing where he was there at 15, and I was like, from the Falcons, I sprint to the podium with his name. Exactly. And funnily enough, they didn't. Yeah, well, because they kind of debated James Pierce because they were like, surely Walker's gonna be gone. So yeah, we can say we don't love the process, but what they end up with is pretty damn good and fascinating because you now have two dudes who are very athletic. Jalen Walker's a little bit undersized for an edge rusher. He's only 6'1", but a little bit beefier at 243. James Pierce is tall and long at 6'5", 245. Ran the 4.47. Both of them are athletes, and they also have kind of different skill sets. Because, Walker kind of wins a little bit more. He has the bend as well, but he wins with power quite a bit. James Pierce is kind of all about bending around the edge. And, they are also both juniors. So that's another interesting part that's not talked about a ton. There, in a draft class that has a lot of guys that were kind of older, these are both young dudes
Yep.
that you are now getting both your edge rushers on rookie deals together alongside your rookie quarterback contract from last year to now have three of those positions at the same time locked up like that. And it's a fascinating process.
Those are, I mean, quarterback's the most expensive position, but edge rusher right there with receivers the second most. So you have two potentially elite edge rushers on rookie deals to be able to continue to build around your rookie quarterback. It is fascinating, dude. It's going to be interesting. And again, I'll reiterate one more time, you're doubling up. So now it's not that it's completely bust proof, but you're much more likely now to find an elite edge rusher out of this class because you took two of the top prospects at the same position. And plus, like you said, Jalen Walker has the versatility. So it's like, okay, if James Pierce is good at edge and Walker's just not working out as edge, well, then just move him to an off-ball linebacker. He did that as well, and he was good at that. So it's fascinating, dude. It's going to be. I'm just interested to see how it works out, how they use both the players.
Yeah.
I mean, in our lanes right now, dude, they're already both listed as the starters on the team, which is crazy because, like we've talked about throughout our draft shows, like our lanes typically doesn't list your rookies as starters. They actually also have another rookie as a starter as well. So, I mean, listen, it's a fascinating draft class, man. Again, don't think I would have done it just because I think,
Yeah.
I mean, the Falcons are not guaranteed to be good. Let's just be real. They're not guaranteed to be good. It's very dependent on Michael Penix, but that could also say the confidence that they have in their young quarterback, because it's like, well, we think we're going to be picking, pretty high in the draft. Well, low in the draft, I guess, if you will. But yeah, man, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and Walker's versatility will be fascinating to see what Raheem Morris does in his scheme with him, because you can move him all over the place. He's going to find a home somewhere. And for a team that ranked 31st in pass rush win rate last year of 32 teams, they now get a guy in James Pierce Jr., who had one of the best pass rush win rates in all of college football, even better than Abdul Carter. And alongside Jalen Walker, who's earned an 83 plus PFF pass rush grade the past two seasons. So that is impact that can make a difference immediately and change the outlook of your entire defense. And then the other aspect that you touched on too is with the James Pierce off the field stuff. I think I love this aspect as well, where the main issue was it's just to clarify, it's not like the Mike Green stuff. Like there's no accusations, things like that. It's, does he love ball, basically? Is he always going to put in the effort for watching tape and things like that? But Jalen Walker's considered to be the opposite. He's considered a high character guy and is in the room and whatnot. So pairing those two is almost the perfect marriage, because if you just connect James Pierce to Jalen's hip and they grow together, then that could become a fascinating use case on a situation like this.
It really could, dude. That's why, I mean, I just think the whole situation as a whole is very interesting. We were also just to give a little backstory, we were also pretty pumped when James Pierce got picked. We saw the Falcons trading back up into the draft, and we're like, what could they possibly be coming back up for? And we're blown away when they doubled up at edge. So yeah, and you bring up a good point about the character stuff, like if Jalen Walker can get James Pierce locked in. But I've also talked about how, like, pass rushers are one of the positions where I'm like, okay, does he have to love ball? Like, if he can rush the passer, does it really matter? It's not a hard position, right, Dakota? It's like there's not a lot of assignment involved. It's like, go get the quarterback. It's not that tough. He also improved as a run defender as well this past season.
True.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's one of the more fascinating draft stories in my opinion, to just see how this plays out. And it's also just another case study on, hey, is it ever a good idea to trade up for a non-quarterback in the draft?
And a little bit more first-person perspective too. Like, I mentioned this to you in our group a good bit, is that some of the stuff with James Pierce may have shown a little bit this past season, because like there was multiple games. We rotated our defensive line a lot. Like we had a lot of depth there, but there were moments where it's like they're down or late in the game and he's not on the field, and it felt weird for our best player to not be there. So I don't know if that ties into any of that or not, but it's something that after hearing those reports kind of made me think, I wonder if that is tied to that at all. But to your point, they don't have to love it necessarily. And Now that he's going to be getting paid millions of dollars, even more than whatever his NIL was, just motivate the guy to go out there and try to win a championship, because now that can also help. So fascinated to see how that all plays out. They continue to build with, after trading out and missing out on their second pick in the third round, they get Xavier Watts, safety out of Notre Dame, a guy that a lot of people, I think, expected to go in the second round, and he drops all the way to the end of the third. And then they double up again, 2 edges, and then go 2 safeties with Billy Bowman Jr. out of Oklahoma in the fourth round.
Man, the Xavier Watts pick, I thought, again, really good value. He's the other rookie that's slated to start according to Hourlands. And if you can get a starting safety at pick number 96, that's fantastic. He had an 89 PFF coverage grade a year ago. That's really elite. And he was a phenomenal player at Notre Dame. Less valuable position, but still I would have expected him to go in the second round at the very least. I think that's where most people had him projected. So thought it was good value, and always love when a team can pick up a starter, plug a starter in the third round, dude. That's just not typical. And when you can do it, it's really valuable. So love doubling up at safety with Billy Bowman as well. So yeah, one of those guys are going to be the starting safety before the season starts.
Yeah, I love the Watts pick to pair him alongside Jesse Bates that they signed in free agency a couple years ago. A guy that, again, even at one point was getting almost like first round hype, but he also just doesn't play as a valuable position. But him being available in third round is crazy good value. Fully expect him to start alongside Bates. And then they do double up. Then I think Bowman can be utilized in a little bit different ways, can almost be like a sub linebacker at times at his size. Does have a little bit of a tackling issue, but something you can coach up and work on. So double at edge, double at safety. And then they wrap up. They only have 5 picks. They wrap up with Jack Nelson, developmental tackle out of Wisconsin. Decent athlete. Dude's big, 6'7", 314. Has an opportunity to kind of, compete to be a developmental backup for their bookend tackles that they have in Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry.
Yeah,
Jake's getting older.
Yeah, he is. He is getting up there, but he's still very reliable. But kind of like the Bucs, man, they don't have a lot of picks because of the Michael Penix trade, now this James Pierce trade. They are low on draft capital, which generally I don't like. But I think with the 5 picks they did have, they nailed it. They really did nail it. So, but again, it's really dependent. And you really have to look at it specifically on James Pierce development, because that's the guy you traded up for, right? So that's now the guy that has the microscope looking down on him, because if he doesn't work out in particular, even if Jalen Walker does work out, then people are going to say, hey, you shouldn't trade up for a non-quarterback, which people are probably right.
Yep. Yep. And then they also had a handful of UDFA signings that were interesting. Most notable by far, Nick Nash, Triple Crown winner in college football this past season, wide receiver out of San Jose State, goes undrafted.
Love it.
Signing him, could easily make the roster and compete for some playing time. Kobe Bryant, corner out of Kansas, another guy that 2 years ago was getting mocked a lot higher. Solid, getting him in the room. And then one other one worth mentioning is Joshua Gray, guard out of Oregon State, who's pretty solid. And after losing, their guards are kind of set up right now, but after losing Dahlman, maybe he could come in and try to compete at center, or just some depth there along the interior of that offensive line. So love to see that. All right, with that in mind, what is your favorite pick for the Falcons?
Favorite pick for the Falcons, man. As much as my bias wants to say James Pierce Jr., you know what? I will say James Pierce Jr. I hate the process. I really do. But I still think, despite the process and everything that went into it, James Pierce Jr. at 26 in this draft class is ridiculous. There was an argument that this was the second best pass rusher in the class behind Abdul Carter. A very legitimate argument as well. Because as far as production, there's no question about that. As far as college production is concerned, he was definitely one of the more productive edge rushers in this class. So, listen, don't love the process, but at 26, love the player. And I think James Pierce will make an impact at the next level.
I'm going to shout out Watts, but I'm going to go Jalen Walker. They didn't overthink it, and my mock nailed it, so I have to go with Jalen Walker. Mykal Williams went ahead of him, which was just crazy to me. And I don't think they
Same.
expected him to be there. They didn't overthink it. They took the best player on the board. And honestly, the fact that they did end up taking James Pierce Jr. makes me almost like it even more, because then it does give you the flexibility to do something different with him. Like, you're not locked into him needing to be your edge one now. And that, I think, opens up the door a lot more to how you utilize him. So
Very
love
good
the
point.
fit for Jalen Walker there. All right. What is the consensus? Renee Bugner's thing say?
They didn't love this one. They are ranked at 26
Thor's why
in the NFL.
Thor gave him a horrible grade.
He did. Thor is definitely bringing down the grade with a D minus. I believe that's Thor, or maybe a Z. But either way, he didn't love it. Oh no, is that an F? No, that's the Chargers. Anyways, chart's hard to read, it's far away. But 26 in the NFL. Listen, I think a lot of people are downgrading them because of the process of trading up for James Pierce, which is completely fair. But they came away with three really good players. They got three starters on defense in this draft, which was their weakness. Like, their offense is actually in a really good spot, and without many holes, they really needed to focus on the defensive side of the ball, and they did that. And I also think some people downgrade for not drafting a lot, which is kind of unfair in my opinion. But that's what it is. They didn't draft a lot, so they got downgraded for it.
I think this one probably one of the most apparent in terms of how different people are when it comes to grading, whether they value more of the players you got, more of the process, because they probably had one of the widest ranges from an A- all the way to a D-. So it's obvious that the A- guys are probably like, wow, they got really good players. I don't really care how they did it. D- are probably like, you gave up a future first. I hate it. So fascinating draft overall. But I mean, all things considered, could completely revamp the Falcons defense, which has not been the best. Great for a minute now. So
agreed.
That is the Falcons 2025 class. Now we will move on to the Carolina Panthers. They kind of make a splash as well. Pick 8. Go with Teteroa McMillan, wide receiver at Arizona. Consensus kind of number 1 receiver, excluding Travis Hunter. And they grab him in the top 10.
This is honestly probably one of my favorite picks of the entire first round. Everyone had them mocked getting an edge rusher. But as we'll talk about later in this draft class, they realized, which I guess some teams didn't, that this is one of the most loaded edges classes in a long time. And it's a very weak wide receiver class. So why not go with one of the, honestly, outside of Travis Hunter, probably the best wide receiver in the class in the top 10 for a receiving core that still needs dudes. This is not they are definitely not set at receiver. They just spent a first round pick on Xavier Legette last year. He was okay his rookie year, not very consistent. He had some drop issues and things like that. They still have Adam Thielen, which, Adam Thielen, productive player, but he's getting up there, man. He doesn't have many snaps left. And then Jalen Coker, the undrafted rookie that kind of broke out last year. Listen, those are interesting guys, but if that's it, that's not a good receiving core. It's not even it's a bottom 5 receiving core, let's be honest. But now you add T-Mac, and all of a sudden I'm looking at this group of receivers and I'm like, okay, I like this group of receivers a lot. Now it is very dependent on T-Mac's development, but right. Again, like we just said, he's one of the best receivers in this class. And what it tells me as well, dude, which I love to see this as someone who's at this point, yes, I'm a Vol fan, but at this point I'm kind of rooting for Bryce, just the comeback story and things like that, because he started his career so poorly. They believe in Bryce Young, man. They still believe in Bryce Young's development. That's immediately what this told me when they took T-Mac at 8.
Yeah, I loved it as well. I loved, I think most people agreed that Legette was a bit of a reach at the pick last year. And his skill set, everything, he just had so many question marks as a receiver, and drafting him to essentially be your wide receiver 1 just didn't feel great at the time. And it's not to doubt the process, because you did need a wide receiver. No one's questioning that, but getting him where they did just didn't feel great. Now, I love the fact that they acknowledged he did not solve our problem. We still need a wide receiver for this team, and McMillan can be a wide receiver 1. He is good at contested catching. He's good at against single coverage. He gets open. Like, he is just an all around wide. Probably the only true, again, outside of Travis Hunter, wide receiver 1 in this class. There were a lot of wide receiver 2s, but he can be your X receiver on the outside. And to your point, help your young quarterback who struggled greatly when he started, but then ended last season quietly playing incredibly well on a team that was just struggling. So I love the pick, love the process of getting Bryce Young weapons and helping. I think, looking at it from the perspective of pushing guys down the depth chart a little bit. You don't want Leggett to have to be your number 1. You don't want Thielen to have to be your number 1 at his age. Now they can bump down and play a role that better fits their skill set and age and time.
Exactly. It's kind of like we were talking about on the live show this morning with the Cowboys getting George Pickens. I agree. You push a guy like Leggett down the depth chart. Now all of a sudden, Leggett is just better in that role, and he can be more productive in the wide receiver number 2 role, which seems counterproductive, but it's really not, because it opens him up with T-Mac on the field. So I absolutely loved it, dude. And like, to your point, dude, this is one of the more fascinating things going into next season, Bryce Young's development, because he completely saved his career the back half of last season, dude. He looked phenomenal. You could argue the back half of last season, he was the best rookie or the best quarterback from the 2023 draft class, which is fascinating considered where Stroud started his rookie season. So I think the Panthers still believe in Bryce, and I don't blame him after the end of last season. And it just made sense to take a wide receiver in the top 10 when this edge class was loaded.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to your point, it's kind of like addition by subtraction by bumping Leggett down the depth chart, because now he's not having to go against corner ones as much, especially teams that flip. So you are essentially adding value to your offense by subtracting something in that sense. So, it makes me excited, honestly, to watch the Panthers this next season offensively, to see what Bryce Young does with these new weapons. They then flip. This division had a theme. Every team seemed to double up at some point, even in like back-to-back picks like this. But they go Nick Scorton, edge out of A&M, who had some first-round hype, and then Princely Umunna-Malin, edge out of Ole Miss.
Nailed it, by the way.
Yeah. I, again, love this process of doing things like this. Slightly different skill set guys and different kind of upsides to what they can become, but love the fact that, to your point at the beginning, they needed an edge. They got mocked an edge for a reason, and then they double up with this deep edge class in the 2nd and 3rd.
Yeah, listen, this is exact, like, their strategy worked perfectly. This was clearly their strategy coming into this draft was, hey, we're going to go target Bryce Young, a weapon in the top 10, because this edge class, we're going to be able to get productive guys. And all the rest of the edge class had so many question marks that why not double up like this in the 2nd and 3rd round, man? And I thought they got 2 really good players at great value as well. Like Princely was extremely productive at Ole Miss, and kind of surprised to see such a productive edge rusher go in the 3rd round, because those guys are usually gone by the end of the 2nd round. But again, it's because like this was the most loaded edge rusher class in like it feels like in modern history, dude. I mean, it was so many good pass rushers this year. And like you said, Nick Scorton was a guy who at the, during mock draft season, I was having him go to the Lions or the Eagles at the end of the 1st round. Like that's a guy that many people had going in the 1st round. And again, this is something that needs to be studied. He's also one of those guys, if you go back and look at his consensus ranking like a season ago, this was a dude that was like in the top 10 as far as like this year's draft class was concerned from a consensus perspective. So I don't know if that kind of stuff matters. Somebody needs to do a study on that, but it is intriguing getting him at 51 with, I mean, a 2nd round pick is a decent investment, but it's not a 1st round pick investment. So I think they attacked edge really well in this class, man.
Yeah. And to your point, like there's the Texas A&M like fiasco with edge rushers where like when they're at A&M, they're just for some reason like worse than when they're not there. Because he was absolutely ridiculous at Purdue. To your point, when he transferred there, people just assumed he was going to grow off that. But And I can't remember who the other one is, but there's a guy that transferred out of A&M that then like went up in draft board his past season. So yeah, and to your point, like PFF had them at 29 and 50th on their big board, and they go at 51 and 77. So, and I think they actually traded up for both of them as well. So they traded up for both of these picks. So they acknowledged the edge need, played the board, and then was like, let's go attack before these guys come off. And again, talking about what projects well at edge, both had really good PFF at 90 plus PFF grades. So the chances they end up becoming good, and Scorton's a really good run defender as well. So at bare minimum, you get that from him. So love the process of doubling up at edge and getting two guys who will probably end up being starters on this team if I was a betting man. So
yeah, agreed. Or there'll at least be good rotational pieces, and that defensive line definitely got better after this draft, dude. No question about that.
Absolutely. So then they go running back in the 4th round and take Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. Kind of an interesting pick. They had drafted Jonathan Brooks last season, who had an unfortunate knee injury after having an injury the season before at Texas. So haven't really been able to even see him, but he was a 2nd-round pick last season, and for a good reason. So they add some depth there after signing Rico Dowdle to try to have some more security behind Chuba Hubbard. And then they go Lathan Ransom, safety at Ohio State, in the 4th round as well. So 2 4th-round picks there.
Yeah, I thought those are two solid picks. The ETN was a little interesting just because I thought there was probably better running backs on the board, if I'm being honest. But the Ransom pick I really like. This is a guy that I think could end up starting for them in the 4th round, which would be incredible. I thought he was a solid player at Ohio State. So, yeah, liked those picks. I thought the running back pick was a little bit interesting, but, not much to complain about. They honestly had a really solid draft, so.
Yeah, 18's interesting because he's kind of on and off the field a bit, so he has a little bit of health issues, but he'd also pretty good at forcing missed tackles, so that's always something you want to see from a running back. Then they go one of the other big defensive tackles from Florida. They go Cam Jackson, 6'6", 328-pound guy, typical nose tackle type guy. Not a great athlete, probably not going to make an impact pass rushing, but can be a solid run defender. And then 2 interesting picks to close out in the 5th and 6th with Mitchell Evans, tight end out of Notre Dame. Usually feel pretty good, like Iowa, taking a tight end from Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Wasn't like overly productive while there, but a guy that always just seemed to be pretty solid. And then a very interesting pick in Jimmy Horn Jr., kind of an I'd say underrated is a good word to use for wide receiver that was also at Colorado alongside Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I agree. I thought Jimmy Horn was a little bit underrated. It's also interesting on our lands. Jimmy Horn Jr. is projected to be the punt returner and the kick returner for the Panthers, which is kind of interesting there. And then, Mitchell Evans in the 5th round. I think he could compete to get tight end reps. I really believe that. So, really good contested catch player. So he could be yet another solid weapon for Bryce in the offense, man. And so could Jimmy Horn, although just looking at the Our Lands thing, it looks like he might be more of a special teamer. But you never know with this Panthers wide receiving core, he could find his way onto the offense at some point. So
that's the thing. You add the depth there, and then with a room that's not the best, you add a little bit of opportunity for some competition there. So love that, and love the depth with Mitchell Evans to pair him alongside Tommy Tremble and Jatavian Sanders from last season. So from a UDFA perspective, they had one interesting pickup in Ethan Garbers, UCLA's QB, another one of those quarterbacks that was kind of on the fringe of whether or not they'd get drafted or not. So add a young guy to come compete potentially to be, the backup to Bryce Young. Other than that, none of these names stand out too much to me. Musa Muhammad from A&M was pretty solid at points. I remember when we played them, seeing him.
They also just brought in a lot of players. I mean, they brought in a ton of guys, so I'm sure some of these guys will probably make the 53.
Yeah, and some special teamers, like you mentioned, Jimmy Horn as well. All right. I think I already know your answer here. But what was your favorite pick for the Panthers?
I'm gonna go the first rounder, man. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
T Mac. I think it was one of the bigger surprises in the top 10 just because so many people mocked them edge. But I think they made the right decision, man. I think Bryce Young needs a guy that can kind of bring him over the hump a little bit and maybe get him closer to that elite level in the NFL. And it's going to be interesting now, man. That's going to be one of the more fascinating stories in the NFL, seeing how Bryce develops and, how T Mac helps him develop.
I'm going to cheat. So I'm just going to clump both of them into one and just say the edges.
I like it.
I'm just going to say doubling up at edge, back-to-back picks with Scorton and Namoon Milan. I think they knew they had an issue there, and they didn't. They took T-Mac. They took who was probably the best player on their board and didn't force edge in the first round and come back and attack it with those two picks, trading up for it. Didn't have to give up too much capital. Still had, 8 picks in this class. So love that process and those two edges. One quick thing I will note is that I'm surprised. We've touched on this with some other teams. I'm only intrigued by the fact they didn't take any offensive linemen. They did sign some, but with an offensive line that has not been the best, I'm a little shocked that they didn't use some of this capital with 8 picks on some depth along the O-line.
That is true. You do. I mean, typically, even teams with good offensive lines take
Yeah.
offensive linemen. So that is kind of interesting how they didn't take a single lineman.
Well, with that in mind, what was the consensus for the Panthers draft?
Tied 11th with the Falcons, or excuse me, the Bucks. So yeah, I think that's right too. I mean, there's also some teams. Well, I don't know, man. There's so many good draft classes. Like to your point, this draft class for the Panthers is probably like a top 5 class 5 to 10
Yeah.
years ago. They they absolutely nailed it, man. And they got some very impactful players at incredibly impactful positions. So I think this could be a draft that potentially helps the Panthers compete for the NFC South.
Yeah, I love that the way you phrase that because this is the type that can help the entire team and franchise take a step forward. Assuming that Bryce continues to develop like he did. So, all right, that is the Panthers 2025 class. So now on to the last team and one of the more intriguing from this draft, the New Orleans Saints. Yeah, yeah. The New Orleans Saints. So at 9, they were one of the wild cards in all the mocks of what would they do at 9. A lot of edge rushers. I would throw them Tet McMillan personally whenever he was available there. But they go with a kind of safer pick and take the third tackle off the board in Kelvin Banks Jr.
Yeah, I didn't have a big issue with them taking Kelvin Banks. I thought Kelvin Banks was a completely fair pick. Kind of to you've been talking about this in the offseason, how Kelvin Banks at most points during last college football season was the consensus second overall tackle behind Will Campbell. Mimbu really didn't get in that conversation until the offseason. So, yeah, Kelvin Banks at 9 made a lot of sense, especially with their tackle just retiring, blanking on his name, but
Ramczyk.
Yes, Ramczyk. And I was going to say Ramczyk, and I didn't for some reason. But anyways, yeah, Ramczyk retiring, which is very unfortunate. He was a great tackle and just had so many injury issues. And then they also took Fuaga from last year as tackle as well. So I like building through the trenches early on, like in this rebuild, because they are in a rebuild at this point. So Kelvin Banks at 9 made sense to me. It was just kind of after that things kind of fell off the rails for the Saints.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of the safe pick. And yeah, if Ramczyk didn't have what was going on, would they have drafted him? Who knows? But I do like the process of back-to-back years locking up your tackles. They drafted, Talise Fuaga last year in the first round, and then turn around and do the same thing with Kelvin Banks to go ahead and fill that void. So, and I think Fuaga may have been a right tackle in college, and they had him playing left, so now he could probably bump back to right, let Banks play left. So similar to what the Titans did, where it's we like to just interchange, but dudes are usually more comfortable in a certain place, so it'll kind of help out their offensive line overall there.
That is how it is listed on our lands as well, so that does make sense.
Yeah, so doubling up, getting the tackles situated, thought that made sense, and then Then things got interesting.
They did.
And then the Saints make a pick that was really the true. Well, actually, this was what triggered the true. Okay, Shedeur is falling
Yes.
moment to me.
Yes.
So the Saints take Tyler Shuck, quarterback out of Louisville at pick 40, not Shedeur Sanders.
It was reported that they love Tyler Shuck, and they were not lying. Some people were getting crazy saying he could possibly go at 9, which would have been absolutely absurd. It's kind of absurd to take him at 40, to be honest. This is a guy that's older, 26 years old in September of this year, which again is like, it's not as much about, oh, you're worried about him retiring in 4 years, but it's mostly, why did you have your best season, playing as a 25-year-old in college football? Like, why did it take you that long? That's a legitimate question. Tyler Shuck also has some of the worst plays I've seen on tape ever. That one play where he just literally just flips it up under pressure in triple coverage. I mean, that's a play where I would one play scout, dude. It was such a poor play that I'm like, I cannot take Tyler Shuck after seeing this play. It was beyond somehow Will Levis memes plays. It was to that level and beyond it. It was just, it's interesting, man. Shuck at 40 is very interesting. I think there were probably a few quarterbacks I would have taken over Tyler Shuck, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, that play is easily one of the worst football plays I've ever seen. So for anybody who hasn't seen it, recommend you go watch it.
Yes.
But it also is a good indicator of one of his big flaws as well. And it's that he has a horrible relationship with pressure. So in that play, he rolls to his right. He starts to get pressured and quite literally underhand flicks the ball away yes. and just into it, corners arms like a punt. And when he does it, he also turns away to avoid being hit. It reminded me of when those videos became a thing of scaring moms when they were walking in the house. And how when a mom gets scared, they just throw the thing in their hand immediately. That's what it looked like. So just atrocious. Man. And to your point too, the age thing, as a 26-year-old, the fact that his production is horrible, because you look at guys like Nix and Michael Penix and all these guys who were in college for a while who produced. Dylan Gabriel this year as well, where you do have the production to back up your time being in college, and he doesn't even have that. He doesn't have the production.
He also doesn't have elite tools. It's not like this guy is it's not like he's a great athlete or has a great arm. It's not like he has insane arm strength. He doesn't even have the best arm in the class. So it was a little befuddling how they got so high on Tyler Shuck, because to me, this is a guy that falls in the developmental QB bucket with the Will Howards or the Kyle McCords, and those guys were the Quinn Ewers. Those guys were taken in the 6th and 7th round, not in the 2nd round. When you're taken in the second round with Derek Carr's health in question, we were talking about this before we got on the show. He could play or he could not play in 2025. But it is a serious question right now whether he's going to get soldier surgery. And it seems like the team kind of wants him to. It seems like the team kind of wants Derek Carr to sit out next year. So that would mean Tyler Shuck's the guy. He is the starter for the New Orleans Saints. And I don't think many people that scout or many analysts viewed him as that. An immediate NFL starter.
Not even a little. And you're right, because Derek Carr's health is completely in question. The most recent stuff as of the last 20 hours, basically him confirming that he has a shoulder injury and that he still has not made a decision on surgery. He doesn't want to get surgery because he's already had surgery on that shoulder and that arm. So he's just wanting to avoid that process. But to Austin's point, the meetings are going on with the Saints, and it definitely seems like they're if we want you to be our quarterback at any point, we kind of need you to fix your shoulder. So either way, it doesn't seem like he's going to be ready to play immediately, and how long he's out will probably be determined on that. So you either are starting Spencer Rattler then, again, which the Rattler experience wasn't great, or you're having your 2nd round pick be the starter immediately. And that is a tough position to throw a guy into who, I'll be honest, probably doesn't need to be starting immediately. And I don't want to continue ragging on the guy, but he also had probably one of the worst combine reps I've ever seen as well, where a guy's running just a slant, or it may have been more of a skinny post, And he does this ridiculous throw fadeaway thing and misses by about 5 yards too short into the. It's wild. So it's just I don't. He must be great locker room guy or something. Like he must have woed them in the interviews of just like, oh man, we don't care if you can't really play quarterback right now. We want you in the locker room leading our team, I guess.
Yeah, and we're giving a lot of locker room and bulletin board material for Tyler Shuck and Saints fans. If he ends up being good, then you can roast us in the comments or whatever, clip it. But it's just to me like he just wasn't worth a second round pick. And typically I'm the guy who's fine with taking quarterbacks wherever. But and I get the Shadur thing is an X factor because I understand why teams didn't want to take a chance on Shadur. But as far as just pure football, we're just looking at who plays quarterback better. That's obvious. It's obviously Shadur just based on the college tape and the production. So, and you could argue even a guy like Milroe is more intriguing in the second round, who does have the tools, right? He is the athlete and the upside, exactly, the arm strength and everything. And I also take like Tyler Shuck, the player. It's whatever, right? Like you could take him in the 6th round, that's fine. It's the problem is you're getting Tyler Shuck and you're plugging him in to be the Saints starter in 2025. Like there's a big difference there, and wanting him to develop versus him being the starter. So it's a risk. It's a big risk, but like you said, I mean, they were obviously convicted about it. Like that was their guy. It sounded like throughout the process, and they spent their 2nd round pick on it. So we'll see how it works out.
And the unfortunate part is, to not continue ragging on him. Like, in his defense as well, it's unfortunate for him because he's going to be asked to do
pressure
more than he should immediately. Yeah. So like he now has that pressure on him and be like, wow, I may in a very awkward locker room situation right now where like they have a quarterback on a deal that is hard to get out of. And whether or not you're going to be playing immediately, you're starting, or this guy who's just drafted last year will be. So also feel for him in that sense that he's going to be thrown into a situation that he shouldn't be in. So, but I mean, he's battled injuries for a while. Like he was a part of the same recruiting class as Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields for reference. Wow. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. And he's gone through injuries and broke out this late. So it's just, again, drafting him later is fine. And it's just the value of taking him at 40 and essentially making him your quarterback. That's just questionable.
And I also wonder who they were competing with. But to your point earlier, as far as his issue with pressure, you also have an offensive line now that's relying on a 2nd-year tackle and a rookie tackle. I mean, like those 2 players, I like as players and I like their projection, but tackles hardly ever come into the league unless you are an elite level prospect and dominate right away, dude. There is a developmental period with offensive linemen in the NFL. And that to me seems like a recipe for disaster. But who knows? I don't know. And I'm really not trying to rag the Saints, but I don't know how truly competitive they're trying to be next year. But then again, you take Shuck at 40, so they clearly see a future with him at a certain extent. But I don't know, man. We'll see how it plays out. But this is a team that unfortunately I could see having, big issues in 2025.
And your point on the offensive line, like you said, 2nd-year tackle who's probably moving to a different position, who needs to take that step forward. Rookie who's going to be starting immediately. They have Ruiz and McCoy at center and guard that probably are their best that feel okay. Yes. But then they signed Dylan Radins, and as a Titans fan, I'm going to tell you, probably not going to be great. So, a questionable offensive line. You're really just not setting up a guy you kind of overdrafted to succeed. So overall, fascinating decision and unfortunate for Shuck to not have the opportunity to potentially continue to develop after his injuries and kind of breaking out. So we'll see how it works out, but it'll be fascinating to follow that this offseason, and will he be the starter week 1? So we'll start working through the rest of their class here. Vernon Broughton, defensive tackle out of Texas, big guy. I think it was a little bit of an overdraft at the time. I think there were other defensive tackles that people would have said gone ahead of him, but not necessarily elite, but can come in and compete for some playing time. Jonas Sanker, safety of Virginia, who's really interesting, led Virginia in tackles the past 2 seasons. So a guy that can kind of hover around the line of scrimmage and make tackles, which you always want to see from a safety. So, and then I'll touch on the next one as well. So in the fourth round as well, Quincy Riley, corner out of Louisville, who's another one of those guys that like this time last year was projected a lot higher and may have still even some may have considered him being a little bit, lower here than they would have thought as well.
It did seem like consensus wise they did reach on a few of these guys, but I mean, like a few of these dudes were productive college players, so they could make a difference on the defense. They clearly, after taking Shuck, focused on defense. Like they focused hard on defense. Their next 4 picks were defense.
Yeah.
And they needed depth on defense, so I could easily see a few of these guys coming in and competing for starting jobs. So yeah, man, interesting strategy. And I like Danny Stutzman. Like he's a fun player.
Yeah.
Just a fun college player. And honestly, again, another productive. They took some productive college players just compared to the consensus and what else was available. They did reach on a few of these guys, but
Yeah, Danny's an interesting one. I overlooked him. Yeah, he's actually a decent athlete too. 4.52 for a linebacker is pretty solid, and was a productive guy his whole career at Oklahoma. So I think he can have an opportunity to compete for some spots. But yeah, it was just an interesting draft overall. I like the positions they attacked, but just felt like they reached a little bit on some guys. They also kind of had a theme where they did draft a handful of guys who were in college for 5+ years, which is always interesting. The COVID stuff kind of forces that to happen, but just interesting to take a chance on that many guys like that. And a couple guys that had transferred. So the Devin Neal pick in the 6th round is really interesting. The deep running back class, we talked about that over and over again, and he had a fantastic career. I think he set school records at Kansas. Not like a high athlete, but was incredibly productive in college.
Yeah, I thought that was solid value. And like you said, it again was another example of this deep running back class, getting a guy like Devin Neal in the 6th round. And who knows? I mean, Alvin Kamara is getting kind of up there in the age, and so they could be looking for the next guy. And honestly, as far as I'm concerned, how I would run the running back position is I would keep drafting these rookies, these late round rookies, and getting them in there on rookie deals and not having to pay them a bunch and not having that investment in them. So I always like kind of loading up at running back, every other year or so to get the next guy.
Yeah, and to your point, Kamara's getting up there, part of that 2017 class, kind of hitting the timeline for running backs. Other guys from that class have already kind of seen their career end. Luckily, Kamara's not had the injury issues like other guys like Chubb has had, but their careers are starting to wind down. And Devin Neal broke a ton of tackles. He had a average 3.73 yards per carry after contact. So kind of like Kamara, who's just low center of gravity. He's a bit stockier, breaks tackles. So he could definitely find his way into some snaps pretty early on, alongside Kendre Miller, the pick from a couple years ago. And then they wrap things out with Maliki Metalvo, tight end from UCLA, and then Fadil Diggs, edge rusher out of Syracuse. And he's the guy I was thinking of, the guy that transferred from A&M to Syracuse, and actually played a little bit better, not being at Texas A&M.
Maybe he continues to develop.
Hopefully, for the Saints' sake, he does. Metalvo was a decently productive. He's a decent athlete. Late round tight end. A lot of these guys are kind of getting drafted to also come in and help block, play a little bit of special teams. And then Diggs is also a decent athlete, so kind of drafted him for that upside there, which the Saints do love doing with edge rushers. So.
Yeah, again, man, overall it's an interesting class. The Saints for so long were so good at drafting, man, and then they've missed the last few years, and this team is just, I mean, it's lacking elite talent and it's lacking depth, so they need to have a good draft class. So who knows, maybe this is it. But yeah, man, it's a team with a lot of question marks, and I think Saints fans know that. I think they know that they are, may not be a very competitive team next year in a division where everyone else, Dakota, it seems like they're going here. It seems like the Saints are doing the opposite, right? Which is unfortunate for Saints fans, but it's just kind of where they're at right now.
So life cycle of a division in those teams, because while Breeze was there, they were riding high.
Yep.
And then again, everything's predicated on the quarterback as well. That comes to show that. And they've been in kind of figuring it out mode ever since Breeze retired. So yeah. UDFA wise, nothing that stands out massively. Just got to shout out our guy, Amari Thomas.
Yep.
He was one of those defensive linemen, a guy that had a chance to get drafted, but they pick him up. Weren't overly active in UDFA signing a handful of guys. So
And remember, Omari Thomas might be playing guard, might be moving to guard for them. So guess maybe some offensive line depth there. So intriguing.
Next, Travis Hunter, two-way player.
Two-way player.
With that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the Saints? I know what it wasn't with them.
Yeah, it wasn't Tyler Shuck. Just throw one more throw one more stone at him, I guess. I guess I'll go Danny Stutzman in the fourth. Just a fun college player. I don't know if he'll end up doing anything in the NFL or not, but just fun to watch in college.
I'll go Banks then. Not overdrafting quarterback in the first, regardless of how that worked out, and just doubling up after taking a tackle last year. You know, if Shuck's your quarterback for the future, or if it's a guy you draft next year, got to have those tackles locked up. So, like that pick there. All right, with that in mind, what was the consensus grade for the Saints?
Worst in the division, 28th in the NFL. Yeah, I think a lot of people just felt like they overdrafted guys, and some people didn't like the Tyler Shuck pick. I will say, I think what did Thor give them, a C? Is that what I'm seeing here? So he was actually kind of lenient on them, which is interesting. He's usually pretty harsh. I guess he liked the Tyler Shuck pick. But yeah, again, it's a draft that they could definitely add some defensive talent and those guys in the mid rounds. And Kelvin Banks could end up being a great pick. That's a guy that people shouldn't overlook, because Kelvin Banks could end up being maybe the best tackle in this class. I mean, those top two guys did have question marks. So, but it's just kind of dependent on Tyler Shuck in a way, man, because if Tyler Shuck ends up being their starter, it's kind of like what you dealt with, with the Titans the last few years, man. The second round quarterback as the starter doesn't always work out.
No, it does not. But yeah, I agree. I kind of agree with the grade on theirs for the most part. Some guys in the middle rounds, like you said, like Sanker, Stutzman, and Riley, that I think could all end up potentially getting some opportunities on the defense there. And to your point, yeah, Banks has the opportunity to potentially be the best, and has the versatility where if you needed to, you could bump him into guard. So you have options there with him. That wraps up the Saints 2025 class and the NFC South. So now 6 down, 2 to go, just the West. Got to go out West next, so keep an eye out for those. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Like, share, subscribe, follow, do all those fun things. We really appreciate any and all of the support. But until next time.
Thanks for talking ball with us.